The Senate Judiciary Committee hearing room was tense, anticipation thick in the air. On one side, a panel of experts, armed with talking points, ready to defend the administration's abortion stance. On the other, Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana, known for his plain-spoken, direct style. He wasn't there for political theater, he was there to ask the questions no one else would. The panelists looked confident, prepared with their statements, believing they were on the right side of history. But Kennedy had a way of cutting through the noise, asking what Americans at home wanted to know. His main question, why should abortion be available on demand, for any reason, up until birth? And who gets to decide that for the entire country? This wasn't just another hearing, it was a battle of ideas, a fight for the country's soul. The panelists expected a polite discussion. Instead, they faced a reality check. Kennedy refused to use their jargon, speaking in plain English, exposing the radicalism beneath their calm demeanor. The stakes were real. This was about life, about who we are as a nation. The clash was inevitable. The fireworks were about to begin. What followed wasn't just debate, it was an unmasking. The so-called experts' true beliefs were about to be revealed. Their extremism, usually hidden behind professional language, was about to come out. They came for a scripted discussion. They got something else entirely. Kennedy wasn't playing their game. He pulled back the curtain on one of the most radical agendas in modern American history. The tension was real because the stakes are real. This is not a game.
Our ranking member has returned from the vote, and I turn to him.
I apologize to some of our witnesses. I had to leave to go vote. Professor Sneed, I find your area of expertise and research to be very interesting. It seems to me there are two options, and if there are others, I hope you will school me. With respect to abortion, one option is to have a federal rule that applies to every American. Under the current status of the law, in order to have a federal rule, more likely than not, Congress would have to pass it, or we would have to amend the Constitution, since the United States Supreme Court has ruled that abortion is not addressed in our Constitution. The second option, of course, is to let the American people decide on a state-by-state basis. There are at least two ways that people in a state can decide. One is through their elected representatives, the state legislature. The other is through a public referendum. Are there any other options other than those?
Well, not if the people are the ones doing the deciding. We saw for almost 50 years what happens when a court decides to constitutionalize the question and takes the matter away from the political sphere, in which one has to live with whatever that court decides. You could Roe v. Wade's one model. You could imagine another model in which a court imposes restrictions on abortion by virtue of interpreting whatever the constitution of that state or sovereign country happens to be. But if the people are to decide, it could either occur in the ways that you described, namely through the federal political branches. Now, there's an interesting question about what the scope of Congress's authority is to regulate the practice of medicine in the states. You'd have to find an enumerated power. Maybe it's the commerce power, something like that. But it's not an obvious source of authority in the Constitution to regulate the plenary authority of the states and override their decisions to regulate the practice of medicine. So what we see most often is the states themselves pursuing as what's been described as a patchwork, whatever is consistent with the values of the people of that state, whether it be through their representatives or by direct.
The hearing would show the world what happens when simple questions meet evasive answers. The panelists were about to be confronted with the reality of their own positions. Kennedy's approach was simple, but devastatingly effective. The room was set for a confrontation that would reveal more than anyone expected. The experts were about to be challenged in a way they hadn't anticipated. The country was watching, and the truth was about to come out. The heart of the hearing was a basic constitutional question: who decides abortion laws? Is it unelected judges, the federal government, or the people through their state representatives? Senator Kennedy cut to the chase, asking the panel, should states decide, or should Congress impose a national law? The panelists dodged, unwilling to answer directly. Their hesitation revealed their real goal: centralizing power in Washington, not trusting voters. The Supreme Court's Dobbs decision didn't ban abortion, it returned the issue to the states. That's federalism, that's democracy. Some states will have liberal laws, others restrictive. That's how it's supposed to work.
Let me ask you this, because I'm particularly interested in your analysis of this tough issue from an ethics perspective. Some of my colleagues believe, and indeed in my opening statement I alluded to some legislation that some of my colleagues are supporting. They believe that we should have a federal rule that applies to every American that says it is solely the right of the mother. The mother has the unfettered discretion to decide when, if ever, to undergo an abortion. What ethical considerations does that present?
Well, the principal ethical question that is under consideration in this whole context is how do the various competing goods relate to one another? I've heard a lot of folks talk about the goods of autonomy and freedom and the pursuit of well-being and healthcare on the one hand. Others.
Let me put it another way. Excuse me
Yes.
for interrupting. I was maybe a little abstract. Let's suppose that a mother presents at 34 weeks and says, clearly past the point of viability for the child, and says, I have decided I don't want to have this baby, if I'm being honest. I don't want to have this baby. And it is going to cause me enormous emotional distress to have this child. I'm just not ready. And she's sincere. She's really thought about it and said, I'm just not prepared to have this child, and it will affect me emotionally, and I want an abortion. What are the ethical considerations presented by that situation as opposed to the ethical considerations if he presented by an abortion within the first 6 weeks of a pregnancy?
But the panelists couldn't accept that. They talked about rights and healthcare, avoiding the core question. Admitting they want a federal law would mean overturning the will of voters in dozens of states. They want Washington in charge, not the people. This isn't about compassion, it's about power and control. Kennedy's simple question forced them to show their hand. The panel's refusal to answer was telling. They want to take power away from states like Texas and Louisiana. The debate was about more than policy, it was about who governs. The experts wanted control, Kennedy wanted democracy. The stakes couldn't be higher. The question remains, who decides? Then Kennedy made it personal and uncomfortable. He asked, if a healthy woman, 34 weeks pregnant with a healthy baby, wants an abortion, should it be legal? The panelists froze. This was the question abortion advocates avoid. They prefer vague talk of choice, not the reality of the late-term abortion. Kennedy forced them to confront the humanity of a viable, pain-feeling baby. Should it be legal to end that life? The panelists squirmed, unprepared for the directness. Any answer would expose the extremism of their position. Most Americans, regardless of early-term views, find late-term abortion abhorrent. The moral weight was heavy. This wasn't a legal game, it was about basic decency. The panelists knew any answer was a trap. Kennedy's question left them cornered.
Well, I would say that the principal ethical question when you're talking about what it sounds like you're describing, legally speaking, would be termed an elective abortion, not an abortion necessary to preserve a woman's life or health. And that is principally, incidentally, that is principally what the social science evidence suggests. Late-term abortions are principally for situational, circumstantial reasons, not for instances of health and safety or even fetal abnormality, according to experts like Warren Hearn and other social science studies that have been undertaken. But the principal ethical question in any of these instances is what is the moral, ontological, and legal status of the unborn child? What you're talking about is the proposal to take the life of an independent human being for the sake of the goods that you are describing, to preserve emotional well-being, to preserve a woman's mental peace or her socioeconomic peace. That's the ethical question. That's what's so in some ways impoverished about our public debate. We hear one side talking about one aspect of the issue, the goods of autonomy and healthcare and so on, and the other side talking about the ontological, biological, and moral status of the unborn child. But the talking is going past one another. No one is, as far as I can tell, engaging all of the different dimensions of the debate, which I think is essential for wise and humane self-governance. No matter what your position on abortion is, you should at least take seriously the other side's perspective. And that's what's missing, I think, from our public debate. And I'm not talking about my colleagues here on the dais, but our public debate would benefit from a more comprehensive conversation about what the competing goods are.
How did the experts respond? With evasion and deflection. The law professor changed the subject, calling late-term abortion rare. But Kennedy's question wasn't about frequency, it was about legality. The doctor hid behind medical jargon, insisting these are complex decisions for doctors and patients. Again, that dodged the real issue. Should it be legal? Another panelist refused to answer, calling the question inflammatory. Describing a late-term abortion is now stigmatizing. They can't even discuss their own position. When arguments fail, they label opponents as bigots. Not one panelist gave a straight yes or no. They dodged, weaved, and hid behind jargon. Their refusal was itself an answer, a tacit admission their position is indefensible. If they were honest about no restrictions, they'd lose public support. So they hide. Kennedy wouldn't let them off the hook. The panel's silence spoke volumes. The reality of their position was too extreme to say out loud. The public saw through the evasion. The truth was in what they wouldn't say.
Chair's permission, I want to see if anyone else wants to weigh on this. Let me present the situation again, because this is a tough case. A situation where 34th week, the mother says, I've decided I don't want to have this baby. And it will affect me emotionally. I just don't want the child. Should the mother, at that juncture, have the right, clearly a viable child, to abort the child? And who should make that decision? And how do you represent the child's interest at that point? Who represents the child's interest at that point? Now, that's a tough question. Would anybody else like to weigh into that? On that, Mr. Matto, my eyes are terrible.
Mr. Matto-Zimmet.
Mr. Matto-Zimmet.
With all due respect, I don't think these kinds of hypotheticals really
Yeah,
reflect.
don't tell me that.
I
mean,
don't think they reflect the
you
reality
just
of abortion
you just
care in this
dodging
country.
the question. You're just dodging the question.
I don't think that there's a point.
That's what.
This is actually get to answer the question.
That's what your side always says. Now, that's not my example's not unrealistic.
I think that
if your answer, I'm going to save my time. If your answer is going to be that never happens, let me go to Ms. Fry. What do you think?
Well, Senator, first of all, if you don't ask a question if you don't want to know the answer, and I think 1%. But I'm saying to you, Senator, 1% of abortions happen at 21 weeks or later. Mm-hmm. So I think the premise of your question sets up a conversation about abortion that is unfair. It is rarely is that ever the instance. The vast majority of pregnancies and abortions that are considered late in a pregnancy have to do with severe, devastating medical circumstances. And I understand your point, Senator. I understand your point. But with all due respect, I also think the chances of people sort of getting all the way through a pregnancy and just sort of saying, I don't want it, is disrespectful to women.
Well,
the majority of women who are getting abortions are already mothers, Senator. They respect their kids.
Kennedy listened to their evasions, then calmly pressed on. He repeated the question, stripping away their defenses. To the professor, I know it's rare, but should it be legal? To the doctor, doctors follow laws. Should the law allow this? The experts' refusal to answer revealed their discomfort with democracy. They prefer euphemisms, reproductive health care, unviable fetus, to hide the reality. Kennedy's plain language shattered their narrative. Their strategy was clear: never admit what they truly believe. Kennedy's persistence exposed the radical, unpopular core of their position. He didn't need to shout. The truth, plainly spoken, was enough. The panel's silence was more powerful than any argument. The panel's tactics were textbook. First, the pity me defense, focusing on tragic cases to distract from the legal question. Kennedy's question wasn't about rare tragedies, but about universal rights. Second, the appeal to authority. Leave it to the doctors, as if citizens have no say. When arguments fail, attack the questioner's character. These tactics, pity, authority, ad hominem, are everywhere in modern debate. They're not meant to persuade, but to intimidate and silence.
Really trying to have a discussion, but that is the alternative I presented is very realistic. I'm not saying it happens 1,000 times today, but that's where the rubber meets the road. And the answer I always get is, well, that never happened. Well, you don't know that, and I don't know that.
But I think the difference, what I would say, Senator, is making a rule.
My thought. What I'm saying is, if it's not a problem, then why wouldn't we make everybody happy by saying, I'm not recommending this, I'm asking a question. Then why wouldn't we just say, okay, if you say it's not a problem, then what's the problem with saying after a certain number of weeks you can't have an abortion? Let me talk to Dr. Scott. You heard my example, okay?
We're now well into Senator Blumenthal's time.
Oh,
so
I'm sorry.
wrap up at your time.
Can I get the doctor's answer? I didn't see Dick come in, I'm sorry.
Well, I would just say that we don't keep very close eye on what's going on in the abortion industry in this country. There are at least 5 abortion facilities that have no gestational limits on the abortions that they will do. So they will do an abortion on request. The woman that you described clearly needs mental health counseling. She clearly needs support. It is highly likely she is being coerced into that decision. The data that we have on late abortions,
But what if she's not? What if she is honestly...
You're really into Senator Blumenthal's time now. So you can have the witness answer the question. question, but then
Okay.
it's not your time any longer.
What if she's not? What if she hadn't been court?
This
It's
is
not your
quite-
time any longer.
this-
Let her finish, and I'll recognize Senator Blumenthal.
This is quite a dangerous abortion for her, and that child is definitely capable of feeling pain as he is dismembered. So as a moral society, we should absolutely say no. We're not going to let that opportunity for that late abortion to happen, and we should be willing to set some limits.
Senator Blumenthal is recognized.
Thank you, Doctor, very much.
Thank you.
Kennedy exposed these tactics for what they are: tools to avoid real debate. The panel's evasions were a sign of weakness, not strength. Open debate is what they fear most. Kennedy's questioning made that clear. The public saw the tactics and the truth behind them. The experts' arguments crumbled under scrutiny. The hearing became a lesson in how not to answer. The hearing revealed a deep national divide. On one side, Kennedy and millions who see a 34-week unborn child as a baby, a life worth protecting. For them, this is about fundamental human rights. On the other, the panelists who see a fetus, a problem to be solved, with the mother's autonomy as the only right that matters. The life of the child is secondary, if considered at all. This isn't a minor disagreement, it's a clash of worldviews. You either believe a 34-week unborn child is a person or you don't. The panelists' refusal to answer showed they know their view is a minority. That's why they obscure it, calling it healthcare. The moral impasse fuels our political anger. We're not just debating policy, we're debating the meaning of life and humanity. When both sides see the other as morally wrong, compromise is impossible. The hearing was a snapshot of two Americas speaking different moral languages. The divide is real and growing. The Senate room became a microcosm of the nation's conflict. The hearing ended, but the question lingers. Who decides? Should Louisiana set its own laws, or should Washington impose one rule for all? The panelists made their position clear. They want control from the top. They don't trust voters or federalism. They want a single national law, reflecting their values, forced on every state. The alternative is democracy. Messy, diverse, but true to America's spirit. Different states, different laws. Maybe that's how it should be. Let people decide what kind of society they want. This isn't about party, it's about self-government. Kennedy's question exposed the stakes. It's not just about abortion, but about who holds power. The panel wants to end the debate by taking the decision away from you. The real question, will we let them? The future of self-government hangs in the balance.